MacKenzie Gore and Andrew Painter are a pair of breakout picks for me in 2025. In this video, we're going to dig into the one tweak that MacKenzie Gore needs to make, and we finally have some Andrew Painter data, so let's get going. Gore finished as a top 30 pitcher in the league by Fangraphs wins above replacement, right next to names like Jack Flaherty, Aaron Nola, and Pablo Lopez. Gore had a 3.9 ERA with peripherals that largely backed up what he did on the mound, including a 3.53 FIP, which is good for top 20 in all of baseball among qualified starting pitchers. FIP is a metric that's more predictive than ERA itself in subsequent seasons by focusing on things a pitcher has the most control over, like strikeouts, walks, and home runs. This was a large improvement from Gore's prior season in 2023, where he posted a 4.42 ERA with a near 5 FIP. The major issue for him that season came on home runs. Gore allowed a 12% barrel rate in 2023, which was the second highest mark in baseball among pitchers with 100+ innings. So what changed? The main thing that jumps out is Gore's fastball grade. It went from above average to plus, according to Fangraphs Stuff Plus model. He had a velocity increase that pushed the fastball up 1 mile per hour and his slider up 2 miles per hour, while his curveball and changeup largely stayed the same in terms of velocity. The velo helped his fastball grade, but he maintained the carry he was getting on his fastball as well, which we measure through something called induced vertical break. This was despite the fact that he was throwing from a slightly lower release height. So what we often see with pitchers is that as the release height drops, they don't get behind the ball as much. So there's less induced vertical break and more arm side movement. So the fact that Gore was throwing from a slightly lower slot and still maintained the amount of carry or induced vertical break he was getting is a really good sign. One of the things I like to do in analyzing pitchers' usage and results is to bucket things off by count. There are 3 standard buckets: ahead in the count, behind, and even, all of which have their own allotment of specific counts, which I'll show here, which should make sense intuitively. When we look at Gore's four-seamer year over year in these situations and focus on contact quality through a metric known as expected slugging percentage, he improved in 2 situations, when he was even in the count and behind in the count. This matters for Gore in particular if you look at when he uses his fastball. It's heavily in these 2 spots. When he falls behind in the count, he leans pretty heavily on his four-seam fastball, and when he gets ahead, he leans on his other pitches. Now, this isn't really uncommon. A lot of pitchers throw their fastball more when they're behind, but even for a pitcher who has an objectively good fastball, this is a lot of behind in count and even fastballs. Something in the 50 to 55% window is pretty average, and Gore, as we saw, is well above that mark. Here, for example, are the top Stuff Plus four-seam fastballs in baseball among qualified pitchers last season. And right next to it, I'm going to put how much they threw their fastball when they were behind in the count or even. Gore is kind of in a tier of his own up here with Carlos Rodon. My point with Gore is that he was better than a league average pitcher, a sub-4 ERA, despite the fact he was incredibly predictable in certain situations with his fastball usage. So I see low-hanging fruit here in terms of pulling some of this fastball usage down, and the template is already out there for the Nationals. The Astros took a very similar pitcher to MacKenzie Gore and Yusei Kikuchi and made immediate changes the second they acquired him from the Blue Jays. I made a video about this during the season, but Kikuchi threw a bunch of curveballs and fastballs with Toronto. The Astros turned him into a fastball slider guy with early count curveballs. And I think the Nationals could do the exact same thing with Gore. Bring down the fastball usage, especially when he's behind or even, bring down the curveball usage a bit, and bring up the slider usage in all situations by sacrificing that curveball. And there's a good chance this guy could be even better than he already is. You could kind of argue that MacKenzie Gore has already broken out, but I guess I'm talking about a second breakout, pushing him into the top 20 pitchers in baseball and solidifying that going into the 2026 season. Fangraphs Steamer has projections out for 2025. They view him more as a top 50 pitcher, which makes sense. They're kind of splitting the home runs he allowed in 23 and 24, coming up with an average, and therefore he's top 50. But I think that Steamer doesn't include some of these usage changes that I'm suggesting. They're not going to be able to predict that. So that's where I see some advantage for bets on Gore, so to speak, to be better better than his projection. It's a pretty easy usage change for me. Now, it defers a bit to what the Nationals want to do philosophically. We saw a couple years ago with the Royals, especially in the minor leagues and even at the major leagues, they started not using fastballs a lot, and that led them to a decent breakout this year, I would argue. The Nationals, as I showed in a video that I made about a week ago, have cut their fastball usage in the minor leagues as well. I didn't really highlight it when I was talking about the Red Sox in that other video, but I wonder whether this is kind of a signal that on the minor league side at least, the Nationals are willing to accept more advanced philosophies, back off fastball usage, etc. It just remains to be seen whether that trickles up to the major leagues and affects a guy like Gore. The next pitcher we're going to talk about was a mystery. He was one of the most difficult pitchers for me to rank on my top 30 pitching prospects list because he was pretty far removed from his most recent set of in-game data. His name is Andrew Painter, and he went down with an elbow injury early in 2023. He delayed surgery until later that year, which forced him to miss 2 full regular seasons of games. But he made 6 starts in the Arizona Fall League that finished up a couple weeks ago, and I am pleased to announce that we finally have data. The good news is that it looks a lot like the spring training data that he flashed in 2023 when everybody was getting really excited about him as a pitcher. Here's the fastball shape in 2023 compared to 2024. Very little is different. The main thing is that he's cutting the pitch slightly less. That's notable in the amount of horizontal or arm side movement his ball was getting in the AFL compared to 2023 spring. His breaking balls appear slightly reworked as well, which you could see when you compare these two break plots to one another. His shapes were tagged as cutter, sweeper, and curveball on the left here in spring 2023. Even with a small sample, we can tell these are pretty distinct shapes. But to my eye, this was basically 3 sliders, 2 variants on a sweeper here and here, and a more gyro slider over here. In the AFL, on the right side, the main thing that jumps out is a reworked slider represented by these green dots, which now doesn't really have a ton of sweep and kind of sits below his cutter. It's a slightly harder, tighter pitch in shape. I think I like it overall. I ran all Painter's shapes through a Stuff Plus model built by a good friend TJ Stats on Twitter and Blue Sky, and this was what I got. The standard deviation here is 12, so a pitch that grades as a 112 is a plus pitch, or it's better than about 85% of the MLB sample of that specific pitch type. Painter has an average fastball, 3 average to above average breaking balls, and a below average changeup. I'll emphasize again that I really think his superpower, so to speak, is his ability to throw multiple solid breaking ball shapes. When you combine that with some funky body metrics, you have a really fun pitching prospect. Painter stands 6'7" on the mound with a 6'6" release height, which is higher than about 96% of other pitchers in baseball. The industry has kind of attached itself to these flat approach fastballs in a lot of pitchers, and for good reason. They work really well at the top of the zone, and it's all about elevating fastballs. But Painter's kind of the opposite of that. He has a steep approach to his fastball, despite the location sitting pretty frequently middle to up in the strike zone. It's kind of similar to Joe Boyle, Michael Wacha, maybe Peter Fairbanks territory. Justin Verlander gets thrown around as a comp here a lot on Painter, but Verlander's such an outlier on the shape side, specifically with his release, that I tend to stay away from that comparison. Although, watching their deliveries, I kind of get it. It's not necessarily bad to have a steeper approach fastball, it's just distinct and it allows you to do different things. You have your own set of advantages. The obvious hang-up here is how many innings he throws. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of Garrett Crochet, Paul Skeens style spread where he's throwing over a long period of time, basically the full season, but not necessarily stretching deeper into games. I'll peg him for about 100 to 120 innings in 2025. We'll see if the Phillies play with his workload and try to rest him to use him in the playoffs. There are a lot of dynamics at play with Andrew Painter, especially on the health side, but that doesn't take away from the fact that when he's on the mound throwing to any hitter, he's had a ton of success. And I think it's all mixed together in what we were looking at with the stuff scores, in terms of those being pretty solid, not unbelievably exceptional, good command, and then some weird body dynamics. His results have been great everywhere, and I think at some point when you get a nice sample of results against relatively high-level hitters, you have to kind of be convinced that this guy is good. I'll also shout out Eric Longenhagen from Fangraphs, who even despite this injury and a variety of other downticks in your projection for Painter, he's always remained very, very high on Painter. I kind of haircut Painter slightly and put some other pitchers above him in my Substack top 30 prospects, but hat tip to Eric because I think that Painter's very good. I guess I was just a little more worried that 2 years removed from pitching would have more of an effect than it clearly has. So these are my two guys for 2025. It's early, I know, but I wanted to talk about both of them, so I decided to combine them into this video. I hope you enjoyed. As always, take care.